and had a really nice weekend just relaxing and doing some stuff around the Lexington area. Last Sunday, we decided to go on a field trip, and so we went down to Wilbury. What's the town called? Wilmer? I don't know. It's where Asbury Seminary is. That's where that revival broke loose about a year and a half ago. And we went to the Vineyard that's literally on campus there. And it's, of course, summertime at a college, so it was quiet. And the town is a tiny little town. The college and seminary are bigger than the whole town. But we had a really good time, and we were trying to grab some of that revival spirit and bring it back up north here. But yeah, thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everybody who kept everything afloat while we were gone. We appreciate it. Let me pray. Holy Spirit, we just invite your presence here with us this morning. Lord Jesus, we invite you here. Father God, we welcome you into this place. Now, Lord, as we dig into your word this morning, just come and speak to us. Come and speak to our hearts. Lord, begin to transform us and change us. Let your word become alive. We thank you, Lord Jesus. We just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. This summer, we've been going through the goal is to go through 1st and 2nd Peter. We've been on 1 Peter most of the summer. 1 Peter is this letter that Peter writes to the church during a time where it's not in full being fully persecuted, but it's also not a time where it's easy to be a follower of Jesus. They're dealing with issues. They're dealing with things that make it uncomfortable for them within their culture, within their society. And so Peter is writing into that environment, which is very similar to the environment that we find ourselves in today. Last week, Brenda talked about suffering as a Christian and how we should suffer as a Christian. I gave her a really easy topic. She had the fun one. And today, we move towards the wrap-up of 1 Peter. Peter's going to begin to wrap this letter up with his concluding remarks. We'll finish it next week, and then in August, we're going to jump into 2 Peter, which isn't a letter that's preached out of a lot, but is very relevant for where we are today. I mentioned that we were at the national conference for the Vineyard in Cincinnati this year. This year, the Vineyard as a movement turns 50. It's been 50 years since Ken Gullickson planted the initial small group that became a vineyard on the west side of LA. And they showed an interview with him at the conference. Ken has gotten, he's older, significantly older now, and dealing with some health issues, so he couldn't come to the conference. But they did an interview that they showed, and he told stories of those early days. For those of us who've been in the Vineyard a while, we've heard some of the stories, Bob Dylan getting saved at a Vineyard small group, Keith Green leading worship, all kinds of crazy stuff that was happening in that time. And then they asked him a question. Why did you come up with the name Vineyard? Where did Vineyard come from? And his answer was kind of funny. He was really blunt. He goes, well, God told me that. And we all kind of, the whole room chuckled when he said that. And he said, well, reading the prophet Isaiah, he felt that the Lord said that the vineyard was what we were supposed to be. And I'm not exactly sure what passage in Isaiah he was reading. There's a couple that talk about the vineyard. But Isaiah 27 has always resonated for me about the vineyard and about this church. And Isaiah 27 goes like this. Sing about a fruitful vineyard. I, the Lord, watch over it. I water it continually. I guard it day and night so that no one may harm it. Next year, the vineyard here in DeKalb turns 30. Next fall, we'll have our 30th anniversary, and I'm already thinking about what I want to do for that, and I want to have a party and a lot of fun for that. Cindy and I, we predate the Vineyard. We were part of the church that ended up becoming a Vineyard many years prior to that. And some of you in this room, Jeff, they were part of the initial group that helped plant this church. Jeff showed up, I think, 4-6 months, if even that much, into 2 or 3 months into he was a college student, little less gray hair. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. A lot has happened over the past 30 years. And in some ways, we still kind of look like that early church. I mean, the early church that was planted here, when Jeff showed up, I'm going to assume that it wasn't that large. They were meeting, I think, at the Lutheran Center, which isn't even the Lutheran Center on campus anymore, and it's not that big of a room. They were probably a little younger than we are today. But in many ways, we kind of look like them. But in the same way, in many ways, we're extremely different than what that church was 30 years. Wednesday night during the conference, they had a worship night, and it was entitled A History of the Vineyard Through Worship. And it was a powerful night. It was a powerful night. You know, over the years, the Vineyard has affected the world of worship dramatically with some of the music that has come out. And towards the end of the evening, Adam Russell, who is the head of Vineyard Worship, came up to kind of do a short devotional, I guess, or story. And he told this interesting story. Him and his brother, they are down in Campbellsville, Kentucky. They own an actual vineyard, like not just pastor a church called the Vineyard, but like have an actual vineyard that, you know, makes grapes and wines and all that other stuff. And he told something really interesting about working a vineyard. You know, those vines, they're very old. I mean, you don't plant new vines every year. It's not like corn or soybean up here every year where they plant brand new seeds of corn and brand new seeds of soybean. Those are the same vines, and they work on those vines for years, for decades. And he said there's something interesting. The older the vine, the more complex the wine that it produces. He says it's interesting because the vine is the same vine, it's always been there, but the grapes that it produced change. The wine that it produces changes. And he goes, that's why sometimes you'll hear of a vintage of wine that's just phenomenal. It's because those vines hit a certain level, they got the certain amount of moisture, the certain amount of whatever they need. I don't grow grapes, but whatever it is, and it creates an incredible vintage. We see that in our own lives. There's another marker today. This weekend marks 21 years that I was asked to be pastor of this church. 21 years, and it's gone by like that. Cindy has pictures at her desk downstairs of the first Sunday that we had baptisms. And it was an Easter Sunday, and there's a picture of us and our family. And my hair was significantly browner, and my children were significantly shorter. And I look at it and I think, wow, it doesn't feel like it's been that long. Now, what's interesting about those 21 years is physically, I am the same person I was 21 years ago. My DNA has not changed. I am the same person. But emotionally and spiritually, I'm a totally different person than I was 21 years ago. I'm not the same person. I'm in a completely different season of life from where I was back then. My children aren't little anymore. They're grown. I'm on the verge of becoming a grandfather. Things have changed. And Peter's going to deal with that exact same thought here in his letter as he begins to wrap this up. The different seasons of life that we go through and that a church goes through, and what it means to be a part of a church in those different seasons. And he's going to challenge us to begin to embrace the season of life within the church that we find ourselves in. So if you have a Bible, we're going to be in chapter 5, 1 Peter chapter 5, starting in verse 1. And Peter says this, "To the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's suffering, who also will share in the glory to be revealed. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade." The first season that Peter's going to talk about here is that season of being an elder. Now, we have this thing about titles in our society. We really like titles. We really get into titles. When I was in the business world, the title you got had meaning. I was in finance and banking, and titles were incredibly important. Were you a vice president? Were you just a basic teller? Whatever your title was, it had leverage. And we tend to find our identities in titles. We tend to believe that whatever the title we have, that should determine how people respond to us. I must confess, I don't use the pastor of title a whole lot around here, but when we were down in Lexington and we got to our Airbnb, which was run by this really sweet elderly couple who we could tell was fairly religious and conservative, I let it slip that I was a pastor, because I knew immediately they would trust us better and treat us nicer and all this other stuff. I know, it's bad. I shouldn't do things like that. But I did. I also know that up here in the north, sometimes if I let it slip that I'm a pastor, it can bring biases against me. And so there are certain situations where I don't let people know that I'm a pastor, because I know that that title has meaning. But titles can go to our head. When I took this church over 21 years ago, the initial founding pastor had moved down to Florida, and for about a 3-month period, the interim pastor, who was a really great guy, but he lived up in Belvedere, and he couldn't work the church on a day-to-day basis, so he had this great idea. He gave everyone the title of pastor. They were pastor of a specific area of the church. We had the worship pastor and the children's pastor and the small group pastor and the pastor of cleaning up the garbage and the pastor of cleaning the bathrooms and the pastor of sweeping floors. I am not kidding, by the way. We inherited a church with about 20 pastors, and we inherited a church of about 20 people. And what was amazing, in this 2-month period, that title of pastor went to people's heads. I would sit down with someone and have a conversation with them, and they would look at me and say, "Well, as the pastor of thus and such," and I'd be like, "You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. Really? Really?" People love titles. They feel the title gives them some sense of authority, that people will have to respect them or respond to them in a certain ways. Titles elevate us. My kids are going to kill me for this one. When my children were little, we had a children's pastor who thought it would be funny, to teach my kids a song and to explain to them that they were PKs. Do you all know what a PK is? It's a pastor's kid, right? Now, pastors' kids call each other PKs. It's when they're in a youth group, they can identify who the PKs are. And pastors' kids, it's not easy being a pastor's kid. I mean, our family's always in a fishbowl. People are always watching everything we do. And our kids, over the years, have done a lot more work for this church than a lot of people realize. So Miss Una taught them when they were really little, this little song. I'm a PK, and you've got to do what I say. And so on a Sunday morning, they start skipping around the church singing, I'm a PK, you have to do what I say. And I was like, what? Titles go to our heads. My eldest still knows that song. Actually, all my kids still know that song. I think they all realize that it doesn't work that way. But yeah. Titles go to our heads, and when we get it, we become like my kids. We believe that title somehow makes people have to act a certain way. But in the vineyard, we don't use a whole lot of titles. We really don't. And there's a reason for that. We've always believed that what you do should define what you are instead of a title. So the joke was, if you want to be an elder, then eld. We had our newcomers class a couple months ago, and I introduced who the board, the elders of this church were, and people walked up to me and said, I had no idea. I didn't think we had a board. Well, we do. We have elders, but they don't wear the title. They do the title. So, what exactly is an elder? An elder holds a place of influence within the church. Not that they influence the church, but instead they influence the lives of the people in the church. There's a big difference. A lot of times we look at roles within the church and we think political. We have an election happening right now when we realize that the people that we vote into office will have the ability to influence the direction of our country, of our city, of our county, of our state. But that is not what an elder does. Their job is not to influence the overall church. Instead, their job is to spend into the lives the people of the church, to train, to disciple, to influence the lives of the people. An elder is not supposed to be a place of power. Instead, they're supposed to be shepherds, servants. Now, we hear the word shepherd a lot in the Bible, and sometimes I think we lose connection of what exactly a shepherd does. A shepherd's job, quite simply, is to keep an eye on the sheep, to keep an eye on the flock. Shepherds don't go around saying, I'm a shepherd, look at the important things that I can do, and then watch the flock run out of the back gate. We were driving in Kentucky coming home. We decided to take back roads, and I saw the funnest thing I've seen in a long time. I think goats are hilarious, by the way. I think they are. And this goat somehow jumped the fence of this farm we were at and was trying to get back in the fence by running along the side of the fence while all the herds of goats were running with it. And no one was watching the goats to realize that the one goat got out of the fence. A shepherd's job is to make sure the goat doesn't get where it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to take care of the flock. And that leads us to what Peter says at the end. Jesus' name, the chief shepherd. The one who watches over the larger flock of God's. And so his job is to make us more like him, more of a shepherd. So what does it look like to be an elder? Well, John gives us a really interesting picture in John chapter 10. I thought I had this marked. I guess I don't. John chapter 10, Jesus says this. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. He protects the sheep. He fights for the sheep. He stays during difficult times. The hired man is there for a paycheck. And when it gets difficult, they scatter. They leave. And so the call to an elder is that, to take care of the sheep like a good shepherd, to care intensely for the sheep. Even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, even when it's not fun. And sometimes caring for sheep is not fun. But notice what else Peter says. Back to 1 Peter in verse 2. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing. There's a difference between wanting to do something and having to do something. An elder is supposed to be unselfish. They're supposed to want to be able to minister, want to be able to take care of the sheep. Elders are kind of like grandparents. Grandparents choose to be in the life of their grandchildren. Parents don't get that choice. Parents are supposed to be in the lives of grandchildren, of their children. Grandparents choose to be in their lives. And that's the running joke about grandparents, right? We get to wind them up and then send them back to their parents. That's what differentiates an elder. They choose to lay down their own agendas. They choose to lay down their own rights. They choose to lay down their own comforts so that they can serve others. And that's why when people start moving into the role of an elder, they tend to run away. People abdicate the role of an elder in the church quite often because they leave, because they find out that when you become someone like that, you're not getting served. Instead, you have to serve. It's difficult. One of the greatest needs for the church, really simple, is for people to show up. People to show up. People to help. People to do stuff. Finally, an elder is a model, is a role model. We need role models in our life. In every different segment, in every different situation, in every different season of our life, we need a role model. When Cindy and I were down in Georgia and we were preparing for the ministry, there was a friend of mine who was, a friend of mine, John. He was only, maybe 5 years older than us, at most. His children were the same age as our children. But John, for me, John wasn't a pastor. He was one of the leaders of the church, but he wasn't a pastor. He led worship occasionally. Didn't have much of a voice. Couldn't play the guitar that well. But man, he loved Jesus. He absolutely loved Jesus. And you saw it in every aspect of his life. And when you hurt, he hurt. And John and I became friends, and John would speak into my life. And at the time, I didn't realize he was speaking into my life. At the time, I didn't realize he was discipling me, but he was discipling me. He was teaching me what it looked like to be a godly father. He was teaching me what it looked like to have a love for Jesus, how to worship, how to press in. He was teaching me, and this was the hard one, how to follow Jesus even when it was extremely difficult. John was really prophetic. And after a couple of years of hanging with him, I used to catch he had a phrase, when something bad was about to happen and the Lord would share it with him, he would come to you and he'd put his arm around you and he would say, God's about to give you a deeper understanding of his love. And you would hear that and you'd be like, oh, awesome, I'm going to experience God's love. And usually experiencing God's love meant the floor was about to drop out from under me and the only person that I could reach out to was him. And the beauty of it is when the floor did drop out, and it usually did, my friend John was there every single time. And he would love on us, and he'd walk us through it, and he'd get us to the other side, and he'd keep reminding us to keep our eyes on Jesus. See, that's an elder. That's a mentor. That's a role model. When I came here 21 years ago, I was a young, cocky pastor. I had it all figured out. I knew what we needed to do. I knew what the church in DeKalb needed to do, and everybody else knew nothing. That was me. Most pastors in their 30s on their first assignment, they're young, they're cocky. And there's a pastor here in town over at First Baptist, Steve. Steve was an old pastor. Steve just retired 5-6 years ago after 42 years in the pastorate. 42 years. So he was 20 years in, 20 years ago. And I remember I'd show up at these meetings, the prayer meetings, and Steve would just chuckle and put his arm around me and say, "That sounds really interesting, Joe." And for the last 20 years, Steve's been my friend. And him and I theologically are like polar opposites. He's a Baptist. I'm not a Baptist. He's a cessationalist. I'm not a cessationalist. But he's probably my best friend in the pastorate here in this town. And during times of trial and times of difficulty, my friend Steve, he shows up. He'd always be here. He'd come to events here, even stuff we did that I knew made him uncomfortable. He would come just to support me. See, that's a role model. That's an elder. And most of the pastors in this town, we still look at Steve and we think he's the apostle of this city, the elder of this city amongst the pastors in town. We look up to him because he's invested so much in so many of our lives. And I see him doing it now with the next generation of pastors that are coming in. And he's trying to teach me and some of the other guys who now have 20 years under our belt that it's our turn to start coming alongside those younger pastors in town and put our arms around them. And even though we don't agree with them, and even though we know they're cocky, just like we were, that it's time for us to invest our lives into them. That's what an elder looks like. So if you're going to be an elder, you need to be a model, because we stand on the shoulders of those who stood before us. That's one of the beautiful things about Christianity, and I said it when we did the baptisms. I baptized someone, but I was also baptized, and they were baptized, and it goes all the way back to the beginning. We stand on the shoulders of those around us. And this becomes clearer and clearer the older I get. Now, Peter's going to discuss the other season that we may find ourselves in verse 5. In the same way, you who are younger, submit yourself to your elders. All of you, clothe yourself with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourself, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Now, there's a trap here that you need to make sure you get. Being younger, or in this case, a young man, or whatever you may have in your Bible, doesn't mean you're young. There's a 1 Timothy, or in 1 or 2 Timothy, Paul commends Timothy not to, just because he's young, doesn't mean he doesn't have the authority of an elder. Instead, he's talking to those of us who are not yet elders. And what's interesting is there are people who are older who are not yet elders. It's so easy to think, if we just did things differently, everything would be fine. I mean, that's how I was when I started. Just did things differently, everything would be better. And that's the thing that it affects us when we're young in the faith, when we're young in our walk, when we're young in our maturity, when we're young in our spirituality, when we're young in our walk with Jesus. But when we're young, this is the time to be submissive, to be humble, because this is the time that God is working on your character. This is the time where he's developing you, where he's transforming you from being a young man or woman into an elder. The choices you make in this season are extremely important, and they can define the rest of your life. These are choices that are going to shape us into who we will become, what our character is. I've told you guys the story that we were preparing to plant a church in Dalton, and then we stopped. And I usually say, well, it got hard, we ran out of money, we were broke, and that is all true. But there was a line. We were dying financially. We were living in extreme poverty. And planting this church in Dalton, Georgia was our hope of getting out of poverty, which is not the reason you should plant a church. Our power at home was turning on and off all the time. Our water got turned off. I remember once having to go to the church to fill up a bucket of water so that we'd have water in the house. And one of the elders of the church caught wind that we were struggling at that level. And this elder was kind of a name-it, claim-it kind of guy, kind of a more Pentecostal, more holiness, and pulled the pastor aside and said, they're disqualified because they can't run their household properly because everything is going wrong for them. And put pressure on our pastor not only to cut the church plant from us, but also to pull us out of ministry at the church. Wanted us to actually go before the church. We had and confess our poor financial management. And he put pressure on our pastor, who gave in and called us one night. We got the phone call, and our pastor was like, hey, I need you guys to step down. That's a hard call to take. You've just invested the last 2 years of your life. You've purposefully put your family into a very bad position. There's a part of bitterness running within you because you feel like the church really hadn't supported you in ways that you needed. And he called and said, I need you to put the church down. And at that moment, my heart, the Lord said, do it. And I said, whatever you want. Whatever you need us to quit, walk away from, we will. And he's like, okay, now let me talk to Cindy. I love my wife. I love my wife. And I took the phone down, I looked at her, and I said, whatever Rocky tells you, you say yes. You say it's okay. I've never pulled the you submit to me woman type thing, but in this moment I looked at her and I go, whatever he says. And it was my way of saying, I know we're about to get hit with a ton of injustice and the road is about to really stink. You say yes. So she took the phone, and Rocky said the same thing to her, and she said, whatever you want, that's fine. And we hung up the phone, and we cried, and we prayed. And we quit everything. Quit everything. And I went through a dark night of the soul during that period, and the Lord really worked on me, and I came to this conclusion that, well, if that was the greatest that we'd ever do in the Lord's kingdom, then it was enough. And I thought we were done. And then later, we got called back into ministry. And about 3 years after we had planted this church, Cindy went down or had a phone call or met with, I forgot, the pastor's wife down there. And they were talking, and she looked at Cindy and she goes, we need to apologize to you guys for what we did to you back then. She goes, it was wrong. We were being manipulated. No, manipulated wasn't the word, but we were under a lot of pressure. She goes, when you guys said, whatever you want us to do, we will do, that shocked us. We'd never heard anything like that before in our life. And it was at that moment we knew that God was about to do something with you guys. That was the decision that opened up the door for you guys to go into ministry 2 years later. See, how you respond as a young man, that will dictate the rest of your life. How you respond in those moments, that sets up the pathway for what God can and cannot do in your life. And there are a lot of people who sit there going, it isn't fair, why aren't these doors opening? And the doors aren't opening because the responses to move you into a place of maturity have not occurred yet. And the Lord's not going to trust you with His flock until He knows that you are mature enough and are ready. So when we are in that position, it's a time to be humble. It's a time to be open. It's a time to be discipled because the Lord is transforming you into what you are to become. Verse 6, Peter says, humble yourself. Choose to embrace the season that you are in. Because as we humble ourselves, as we go through those seasons, the Lord molds us. He changes us. He allows us to trust Him more than us. And when we get through that season, that's where doors open up. Because God is choosing us, is calling us to live in obedience. And can we be obedient to one another? Because if we can, then we can also be obedient to Him. So if you're in this season, live in a place where you choose intentionally to serve one another. When we look at a picture of an elder and a young man, they're both in a place of serving. But it's taking that ambition of a young man and tempering it so that they can be trusted to become an elder. Ambition is a good thing when it's about service, but it's a bad thing when it's about ego. Now notice how Peter wraps this section up. Verse 7. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. It is so easy to get discouraged no matter what part of life you are in. But Peter is reminding us, cast your concerns on Him, and God and Jesus will put you in the right place at the right time. Enjoy the season that you are in, because this is how you grow and get into the next season. Our time in Georgia was incredibly difficult for us. We struggled being young parents. We had babies, and we were trying to learn ministry. We struggled learning ministry. It was hard work. We struggled financially. The stresses and anxiety were incredibly high. So high that on most Sundays, I would find myself running up front to church for ministry time, no matter what the call was. It didn't matter. I just needed prayer. I would go up in front, and I'd usually just sob the whole time. Just sob. During the worship night at the Vineyard, they played a song, an old Vineyard song, I Love Your Presence. We've sung it here a couple of times. The lyrics are simple. In the glory of your presence, I find rest for my soul. In the depth of your love, I find peace that makes me whole. I love your presence. When we were being trained, that song had meaning for me because I realized that nobody except Jesus had my back. That no matter how difficult the situations were, I needed Him more than anything else. That I needed to press deeper into Him. That I could trust Him. That I needed His presence to be with me. They started playing it back in Cincinnati, and I was worshiping it, and all of a sudden I was transported back to that old building on Tennessee Street, back to that ugly green carpet lying on the floor, sobbing in the presence of the Lord. We used to call it carpet time. And I began to weep. And the Lord showed me how I was in His presence back then, blowing snot, as we jokingly called it. That moment, it formed me, it shaped me. It helped me back then turn into the person that I am today, the pastor that I am today. If it wasn't for those moments, I would not be the person who I am. Seasons change. We know that in the Midwest. We have extreme season changes here. But we also understand that certain things happen in certain seasons, right? You can't get a harvest out of season. Once the snow comes down, it's too late. You can't bring in the corn anymore. The same is true for our lives. We move from season to season. We grow from season to season. And we're called to embrace the season that we're in. And there's a promise from God in that. Verse 4. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of glory that will never fade away. Embrace the season that you are in. If you are an elder, then eld. Be a role model. Don't run away from it. If you're a young man, then develop your character. Be molded into that role model you're supposed to be. Embrace the season and God will reward you. Now, I want to close with one interesting tidbit. You may not be an elder in the church, but you may be an elder to someone else. You may not be an elder here, but you may be an elder to a family member, to a friend, to a neighbor. Sometimes we think, well, I'm not fully an elder yet. But then we look behind us and we see there's like a person following us. Help that person who's coming up behind you. Be a model for that person who's coming up behind you. Help shepherd that person. Because they're looking at you. They're looking at you to figure out, how do I do this? Being a follower of Jesus is not a passive thing, it's an active thing. And there are moments in our lives and relationships in our lives, well, although we are young men, we find people behind us who are further behind, who need us. And it's in those times that we're called to work with them. Now, even if we are an elder, there's always someone above us. There's always someone further along the way. And so, as elders, we also need to realize that we need to step back and realize that there are moments that people are speaking into our lives, that are molding us, that are changing us, even though we've been walking with the Lord for 30, 40 years. They did ministry time at the conference, and I still went up, okay? I went up to get prayer. Because there are moments where I know I'm still a young man. But there are other times I went up and prayed for people because I know there were moments where I was an elder and I needed to. Remember, there are moments where we're called to watch over those behind us, to speak life into them, to help guide them. It's so easy to sit back and just be a spectator. We want to come to church, we want to grab our coffee, grab our croissants, sit down, wait for the show to start, and then when it's over, we get to go home and do whatever we were planning on doing today. And then we wonder why we never experience any of the cool stuff that other people talk about. I had someone complain to me, I'm just waiting for that Holy Spirit moment to happen. Well, if you don't put yourself in a place where the Holy Spirit is at, it probably ain't going to happen. Oh, yes, He can meet you in the middle of anywhere. But it's usually better if you put yourself in a place where He's working. So, as you go today, let me ask you this. Who are the elders in your life? Not just by title, but whom have you allowed to speak into your life? Who are you learning from? Who are you trying to imitate? Who are you letting pray for you, to minister to you? I got a list. I told you about Steve, but I got about 5, 6 other people that regularly speak into my life. And then, whose life are you speaking into? Who's looking up to you? Who are you teaching? Who are you praying for? Who are you ministering to? That's what a healthy community looks like. That's what following Jesus looks like. When we are all both receiving and giving, when we are all both blessing and being blessed, when we are all receiving and giving prayer, when we are all receiving and giving ministry, when we are all loved and being loved. That's what we're called to be. Following Jesus is not a spectator sport. Following Jesus is about being active, about being part of a new family, the family of God. So, who's speaking into you, and who are you speaking into? Let's pray. Holy Spirit, we just invite your presence here this morning. We say, come, Lord Jesus, come into this place. Lord, for many of us, coming out of the last few years, it has been so easy to just take the seat of a spectator. It is so easy just to sit back and enjoy the show. But Lord, you've called us. You've called us to live and embrace the season of life that we are in. You have called us. You've called some of us to speak into others' lives, to be shepherds, and you've called other of us to be developed, to be matured. So Lord, I pray, come and move. Come and move in our church. Come and move in our lives. Lord, allow us to become active. Allow us to press after you. Help us eld. Help us grow. We thank you, Lord God. We're going to take some time now for ministry. And Jeff and John are going to come up here. For some of you right now, you may be dealing with a season of life that is just not fun. That's quite difficult. And if that's where you are today, then I want to invite you. As a small church, it's not easy to do ministry time. I get it. It's almost embarrassing to come up and get prayer because people are going to think that I'm what have you. But believe it or not, this is one of the places where the Lord actually does work in your life. The Lord did for me the other week, still to this day. So I want to invite you, if you're in a place where you're tired, you need a touch from the Lord, then I just want to invite you to come on up. They'll go to either one of them. They'll pray for you. If you prayer for healing, for anything else, then we want to pray for you for that as well. We're not really good at hard endings. We're just going to kind of close. But feel free and get prayer. Just let the Lord meet with you tonight. The peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you in the wilderness. May he protect you in the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Feel free to come up and get prayer.